Looking for NFL football? Stop right here. You found your home for weekly NFL talk and fantasy football. Coming to you live from the BackupPunter.com. This is the Backup Punter Podcast. Now, here's your host, the man who thinks fullbacks win championships, Keegan Matheson.
Welcome back to the podcast. That's right, this is episode number 12 already. They're flying by. Thank you again for joining the Backup Punter Podcast. Find me on Twitter at the Backup Punter. Subscribe on iTunes. You can also catch the show on YouTube if you prefer. Visit thebackupppunter.com. We'll have some stories up there over the coming week. Hasn't been too much on the website lately. This time of the off season, it's all about OTAs, mini camps, which are kind of a glorified version of, is this guy in shape? Does this guy still have 2 legs, 2 arms? So I'm not going to flood you with clickbait about people who are breakout stars or make or break years, because that's all you're seeing right now. You don't need more of that. I don't need to put more in your basket. But this week we're going to have a good show. We're going to talk about Cam Newton. He is a rich man now, and the Carolina Panthers are a happy football team. Well, who got the better end of this deal? Did Cam Newton get overpaid? Now, the hot take of the week is that they gave too much money to Cam Newton. People point to his record, the team's performance. Is this too much? Well, we're going to get into that. I'll give you a hint. The answer is no. This was something they had to do. Now, after we talk about Cam Newton, we're also going to talk about fantasy football wide receivers. We've done this the past 2 weeks, if you've been listening, with quarterbacks and running backs. We'll look at who I consider to be the elite guys, the top guys. Then, of course, I'm going to go through 5 I love, 5 I hate, and 5 I want you to keep an eye on leading up to your fantasy draft. I don't know about you, but I'm already looking at my leagues, getting antsy to pick keepers, already planning the way where I'm going to start out 0-4 and then make my epic waiver claim return. I'm a waiver wire assassin. That's who I am. I don't start strong. I just don't. Now, as always, the Backup Punter Podcast is brought to you by the good people, dare I say great, at DynastySportsEmpire.com Fantasy Sports. So whether you're into NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, Dynasty Sports Empire's got you covered. So check them out online, on Twitter at DSE_football. Join a startup Dynasty Fantasy Football League today. The leagues start at $50. They are worth every dollar. So check those guys out. Speaking of the NBA, I'm not sure if you guys are NBA fans at all, if you're Cavaliers fans, or if you're LeBron haters. I guess you put me in the latter category. A, because if I have to hear one more conversation about LeBron or Michael Jordan, I'm going to absolutely tear my eyes out. It's almost becoming comical. Every day, every show, you have to hear this LeBron or MJ. And that's, you see that in every sport now. We see it in football, like we talk about with Tom Brady. Is he the greatest of all time? Is Dan Marino the greatest of all time? Is Peyton Manning the great? Is LeBron better than MJ? I don't care. They're both pretty good at basketball. That's good enough for me. And I'm also cheering for Golden State because I can't stand LeBron's very fabricated underdog story. And I know about 100 of you just exited the podcast for me hating on LeBron. It's not the most popular stance, but I always think back to when they won the NBA championship with Miami, the big 3 with Bosh and Wade, and LeBron in the post-game interview saying, "Oh, I'm just a kid from Ohio. I'm not supposed to be here." Well, you were born the most physically gifted human on the planet. Of course you're supposed to be here. You're one of the most talented living things on planet Earth. Yes, you're supposed to be here. Now, this Cleveland story, it's a little better. It kind of is an underdog story. And I said on Twitter earlier this week, if there's a way that Cleveland could win, but maybe Steph Curry and LeBron trade teams halfway through, count me in. But we're 3 games into the series now. I'll probably watch a little bit of it later in the series, just because it's almost, why I watched American Pharaoh go for the Triple Crown. It's not because I care, but it's just one of these things where it's one of those brief instances where you can see greatness happen in sports. It's not something that you see as often as you think you do. So I'll be watching. And I can't help but cheer for Cleveland a bit. They deserve a championship sometime within the next century because God knows the Cleveland Browns are not going to get it for them. Unless they start Josh McCown, of course, then they're going to go 16-0. Speaking of great quarterbacks with elite athletic skills, Cam Newton. He's a rich man, signed his 5-year, $103.8 million contract, keeps him with the Panthers till he's 32, which is a good age to sign a contract to for the Panthers. $60 million guaranteed, not all of it fully guaranteed. Some of it's just guaranteed against injury. I'll have an article about that coming at the Backup Punter because I really want to get into what these words in contracts mean. Guaranteed, fully guaranteed, the annual values. It's a new world. It's a new language. It's not as simple as you see in a sport like baseball. Now, the initial reaction to this is, well, here's another $100 million contract. You've got guys in this league like Colin Kaepernick, my dearly beloved Colin Kaepernick. He's got a $100 million contract. Jay Cutler does. Andy Dalton's got a $96 million contract, for God's sake. Now, completely different structures, guarantees, which is why I want to talk about that someday. But this $100 million contract, it's a benchmark. Now, the initial reaction to Cam Newton's contract, a lot of positive, but I was surprised at how negative some people were about it. Now, a few of those people made valid points. A lot of them, it's just the sports hipster mentality. You have to go against the grain to look like you have a higher understanding of the sport, which isn't true. I digress. Now, what I like about this contract right off the bat is how Carolina structured it. They structured it very intelligently. What I hate about these mega deals is when you look down the road and you see a massive cap year. You see like how Tony Romo has to restructure his contract every offseason? That's what happens. And if you're into the NFL and you want to get more involved in understanding these contracts, one thing to look for, when you see a contract signed, go on Spot Track or find a good article about it. Look down the line at the cap numbers. Are the cap numbers going from 5 million to 8 million to 14 million? Or are they going about the same? Because sometimes a team will have to really pay a guy later, backload a contract to fit him in now. You see that with Joe Flacco, the Baltimore Ravens, another guy with a $100 million deal. Right now, he's making a very digestible amount. But in 2017, Joe Flacco, his cap number, sit down, take a breath, drink something, preferably whiskey. His cap number in 2017 is $31.15 million. Now, I'm a believer in Joe Flacco, but that's a bit ridiculous. So why I like Cam Newton's is that his stays right around the same. His number one cap through this whole contract, the peak, is in 2019, where it hits $23.2 million. That's manageable. That's okay. So all of the numbers are staying around the same place. So let's look at Cam Newton as a quarterback, his performance. Well, his career record, 30, 31, and 1. So he's basically 500. 2013, the Panthers had that good season. They went 12-4. Now, Cam Newton, career 59.5 completion percentage. Not what you'd like to see. His seasons so far, he's usually averaged in around, he'll have 20 to 22 touchdowns, 12 to 14 interceptions. He has a career 85.4 quarterback rating. Now, of course, what sets Cam Newton apart is the legs. He's got 33 rushing touchdowns, including 14 as a rookie. People have somehow forgotten that Cam Newton had one of the best rookie seasons in the history of this league. It was incredible. It was cinematic. It was transcending. It was almost like vintage Michael Vick out there, only twice the size. But we've forgotten about that quite quickly. He's averaged 5.5 yards per carry, 41.5 yards per game. For you fantasy people, that's an extra few points a game, which I love. So he has been a passable thrower. If you just look at his throwing numbers, then he's pretty much just a Brian Hoyer or a Josh McCown, one of these guys that, a few more touchdowns and interceptions and 60%. But his athleticism is unmatched in this league. It's absolutely unmatched. And that's what sets him apart. Is he a top 15 quarterback in this league? Yes, he is. He is, for me, above the Flacco line, which I always discuss. The Flacco line, meaning you have to be as good or better than Joe Flacco if you're going to be a franchise quarterback. He is the zero that you have to be above. I think Cam Newton's above that Flacco line. I think he absolutely is. He's done this on a team that has often had a disgusting offensive line. When we call it the offensive line, what I mean is that it offends me to look at this offensive line. And it's no better this year. I'm not sure why they have not chosen to address it with more aggression, but hey, at least they got this contract right, you know? If Jonathan Stewart gets injured, does he have enough running game? I like Kelvin Benjamin. I think he's got a limited ceiling. Devin Funchess. Again, I'm not agreeing with this ideology of, well, he's an inaccurate passer. Let's get him some big receivers. Well, big receivers have their limitations. But regardless, is this a good deal for Carolina? Yes. Because what the hell else are you going to do for a quarterback? You have got a quarterback above the Flacco line. If you're going to start over, it's going to cost you significant assets, probably a high first-round pick to find a new quarterback. It's going to mean that you're probably going to have to bomb a season to get a top quarterback, like Cleveland did before picking Cam Newton first overall. But you just don't find guys like Cam Newton. Not only is he the best player on the team, but he is that face of the franchise, and there's value in that. You've got to consider that these teams are businesses. Just like somebody buys a Boston Pizza and runs a Boston Pizza franchise, there's a man in this world who bought the Carolina Panthers and he runs them as a business franchise. Yes, it's about winning because that pushes numbers, but it's a business. Cam Newton sells jerseys like mad. He sells jerseys. He is the handsome, smiling, billboard face. When you think Panthers, you think Cam Newton, period. That's as easy as it gets. And my argument is that there will always be a Cleveland Browns in the NFL, and that's why all of these quarterbacks are going to continue getting massive contracts. What I mean when I say that is that there's always going to be a team so desperate for a quarterback, so void of talent for so long at quarterback, that they would, in a heartbeat, offer Cam Newton, someone like that, offer Eli Manning even, one of these, just around the Flacco line guys. They might offer them $25 million a year. They might make that horrendous overpay just to get something. So you can't let your quarterback dangle out in the wind, or you will lose him. So this is a great move for Carolina. It's setting them up for success. It gives them a still point to build their team around, which they do need to do. Their defense is getting better. Luke Kuechly, one of my favorite players on this planet. But they've got to get Cam Newton some weapons. But at least now they have time to build around him. And if I'm Andrew Luck, if I'm Russell Wilson, I'm leaning back on the couch and laughing right now. As much as I love Cam Newton, Andrew Luck is a significantly better quarterback than Cam Newton. Andrew Luck is not that far off athletically either. Andrew Luck and Cam Newton, their combine numbers, they're not by no means equal, but people do not give Andrew Luck the athletic credit he deserves. But he's a better quarterback. Could he get $25 million? Maybe Andrew Luck will be the first quarterback to get that fully guaranteed contract. You know that Jim Irsay is, he's a lunatic. I love the guy, but he's a bumbling fool. In a beautiful way, though. I have a complicated relationship with Irsay. One we'll get into. We'll write some good letters. But he seems like the type of guy that would tweet out the nonsense he usually does, where he says, about to drop a bomb on you right now. Fully guaranteed contract, $25 million a year. If Cam Newton's worth 20, how is Luck not worth 25? Then you look at Russell Wilson. Let me preface this by saying I'm getting nervous about Russell Wilson's situation in Seattle. 99% of me still sees him as a Seahawk for life. But I'm really getting the feeling that he's willing to bet on himself. Maybe play under that franchise tag, see what happens. I'm not seeing a quick resolution, which is it's a weird feeling. But Russell Wilson's been to 2 Super Bowls, got a ring in one of them. So compared to Cam Newton's deal has to be the absolute basement floor starting point, doesn't it? How can you even consider a number lower than Newton's for Russell Wilson? Now, Russell Wilson has a baseball agent running football negotiations, so who knows how that will work out, but it's something to think about. And that's something that is always enjoyable to do, and I'll recommend that to you. When you see a mega deal, look around the league for similar players. It's fun to do in free agency too. But when you see a contract like this, look around the league, because other players are watching, other agents are watching, and in this situation, they are giving it a hearty, firm, stone-cold Steve Austin, hell yeah. So that's what I think about Cam Newton. Thumbs up, move on. The Panthers have bigger problems, and they're all around Cam Newton. Now, I want to get into wide receivers here. Spend the next half hour on those, the bulk of the show. Just as we did with quarterbacks, running backs, I want to take an early off-season look at wide receivers. I'm not going to give you rankings yet, because doing rankings right now is, frankly, it's stupid, because you don't know what roles the teams are going to put these receivers in. You don't know the offensive scheme yet. You don't know if one of these receivers is going to be on crutches in 2 months. I save rankings for August. We'll get to those then. But just like I did for quarterbacks, running backs, the rankings that I am using, just for sake of discussion here, are ESPN's initial top 300 rankings. Came out, 3-4 weeks ago. I'm not using them because they're the most accurate, because they're not. I'm not using them because I think they are going to represent the reality of August, because good Lord, they are not. They're not the best thing going, but I'm using them because they're probably the most common rankings that you'll see. If you're in an ESPN league, they're what you're looking at right now when you're running mock drafts. So just for the sake of simplicity, we'll go through them. Now on ESPN, I have the same top 11 as they do, just in a little bit of a different order. So I'll give you just my top 11 rankings. Only giving you these rankings right now because I think that these are the elite group of receivers. There's a top group. Just like I gave you 11 running backs. Now I think for the running backs, 6 of them were guys that I was locked in on. The other 5 to make up the top 11 were a little more iffy, but still the elite top group. Those were Le'Veon Bell, Eddie Lacy, Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles, Marshawn Lynch, Arian Foster. Those are the 6 locks. Then to round out the top 11, CJ Anderson, Matt Forte, LaShawn McCoy, DeMarco Murray, Jeremy Hill of the Bengals. So that's the 11 running backs at the top. Let's go through my 11 receivers here. Number 1, I've got Antonio Brown. Now, last year, 129 receptions, led the league by 18, almost 1,700 yards. There's no Le'Veon Bell for the first 3 games. Where do you think the football is going to go? It's going to be Antonio Brown, early, often, late, in the middle, up, down, east, west. The ball is going to be going to Antonio Brown whenever possible. And I think the Steelers are going to be in close games. They're not going to run away with too much. So he's going to be fed. I think he's going to be the number 1 receiver off the board. Number 2, I'm agreeing with ESPN, but I really think that I'll be changing this by August. But just for conversation's sake, I have Demaryius Thomas here. Led the league in targets with 184, 1,619 yards, 11 touchdowns. I love Demaryius Thomas. I loved him before he was the superstar Demaryius Thomas. Loved him out of college. Absolutely loved the guy. How many times can I say loved here? Is it getting weird for you? It's not getting weird for me. My issue here is Peyton Manning. Can Peyton Manning push the ball downfield? And is this offense going to become so run-centric that it takes away Demaryius Thomas's value? Maybe he gets stuck around 90 catches, 1,200 yards this year. Will that drop a bit? I really am nervous about Demaryius Thomas. I'll leave you with that. Look for him in my August rankings. Number 3, I've got Odell Beckham Jr., most yards per game in 2014. Remember, he only played those 12 games. I know there's someone out there listening who had Odell Beckham and dropped him in week 3 or 4. Just know that I'm here for you. Email me. There are resources available to you, and we can talk it out. But he had a touchdown per game. He's going to be the focal point of that offense, period. If Victor Cruz comes back, that can draw a little coverage from him. Ruben Randle is... He's just such a receiver. I see Ruben Randle, I say, but he'll take a cornerback away. So I like Odell Beckham at 3. Keep in mind, too, that one-handed catch was the worst thing that could have happened to Odell Beckham because people just see him as this fancy catch, wow wide receiver. He can run routes very well. He's polished. Don't forget that. When guys make a nice play, it seems that they're turned into this circus act. He's more than that. Number 4, Dez Bryant. He had 88 catches, 1320 yards, 16 touchdowns. I think the touchdowns are going to come down, obviously. But I think his receptions, even his yards, have a chance to pop up here. DeMarco Murray is gone. Dallas's defense, despite performing well above their talent level last year, it's still bad. So without DeMarco Murray, I don't think they're going to have as much clock control. I don't think they're going to dominate time of possession. They're going to throw a little bit more. And Dez Bryant has the motivation of a contract. You better believe he is going to come out firing on all cylinders. I think he has a chance to be that number 2 guy instead of Demaryius Thomas. Number 5, a guy who's underrated, I don't know how, Julio Jones. 104 receptions last year, almost 1,600 yards, and this was in 15 games. He missed one. His issue was that he had just 6 touchdowns. Now, a little improvement in the run game might loosen up the defense. Roddy White is still plenty fine to take away coverage. Julio Jones, safe bet this year. Number 6, I've got Jordy Nelson of the Green Bay Packers. He had a massive year last year. I will argue till I'm blue in the face that he's one of the NFL's most underrated players. 98 receptions, over 1,500 yards, 13 scores. Now, Donald Driver, he caught some heat when he was with the team, with the Packers, because he would say this a lot. I was listening to the Dave Damashek football podcast earlier this week, and analyst scout Bucky Brooks said the same thing. What Bucky Brooks said is that he's underrated because people see a white receiver, and they see a possession guy, like a Brian Hartline, something like that. And I'm not saying if that's absolutely the case, but there, a lot of players have made that point. But people really don't respect Jordy Nelson's deep game. They don't respect that speed. They get up and play him in press, and he's gone. Aaron Rodgers over the top to Jordy Nelson. You saw it 10, 20 times last year. He gets over the top. Now, he's 30, coming off hip surgery, but even if he gets that 90 receptions, 1,200 yards, 8 or 9 scores, that's a great value. Number 7, the guy I have a little higher than ESPN, Alshon Jeffrey. Now, he had 145 targets last year. I could see that topping 170 this year. I think he could be absolutely fed targets if he can handle number 1 duties. When Brandon Marshall was in Chicago, he had that 230-pound body to box out guys, to make catches, even in tight coverage. Can Alshon Jeffrey do that, or does he need to use his size to get open and catch open field balls? Because that might be an issue. But I like his numbers to really pop up. He had 10 touchdowns last year. No reason he can't do that again. Behind Jeffrey at number 8, I have Calvin Johnson. And it's kind of like how we see Peyton Manning not at number 1 anymore. It's strange to see Calvin Johnson not at number 1, but I think he's starting to slow down a little bit. Having a big body is fantastic, but a 6'5", 240-pound body feels a lot worse at age 30 than a 5'10", 180-pound body, in my opinion. Not that I've had either of those bodies. I'm more of a fullback myself. But for what it's worth. Now, Calvin Johnson last year, he was hobbled all season. 13 games he appeared in, 1,077 yards and 8 touchdowns. He'll be 30 in September. Now, with Golden Tate Maybe Eric Ebron will break out and do anything this year. Maybe the running game will be a little more involved. Amir Abdullah, Joik Bell. Is he going to get the targets he has gotten in the past? Yes, I think he still will. But I'm not sure if he's going to be creating those massive downfield plays as often. And I'm not talking about him falling apart here. I'm talking about, instead of him putting up 100 catches, maybe 95. I'm talking about a slight step back. He's just not that 26-year-old megastar anymore. So I've got him at number 8, but come on, it's still Calvin Johnson. Number 9, I have A.J. Green, who is a guy that I might drop even further when I do my rankings. 13 games last year, just 69 catches, 1,041 yards. What I worry about here are two things. Andy Dalton, he might be just below the Flacco line, to be honest. Andy Dalton is, he's just good enough to have a job, unfortunately, for Cincinnati. The Rouge Rocket. My other worry is Jeremy Hill, because he's so good. With Jeremy Hill pounding the ball, Giovanni Bernard acting as a nice scat back, maybe a receiving back out of the backfield, this is going to be a run-centric offense. Very much. Now, Andy Dalton is not going to be uncorking deep balls either, so where is A.J. Green's role on this team? I feel like if he's on another team, he could be pushing, in around Julio Jones, a top 5 receiver. But on the Bengals, I've got him at 9 now. I'm probably going to drop him more. Number 10, I've got Randall Cobb. 91 grabs for 1,287 yards last year, 12 touchdowns. I don't expect him to hit those numbers this year. Green Bay has got to become a lot more diversified on offense. They were top heavy. It was Nelson Cobb or nobody last year. But I think he's still going to put up that, in around the 10th best receiving numbers this year. Very valuable, especially if you are in a PPR league, because he's going to grab a lot of short passes from Aaron Rodgers. So keep an eye on Cobb. Number 11, rounding out my group of, I keep saying elite. I hate that word. This is just my top tier of guys. Elite is another one of those words, just like LeBron versus MJ. Is he elite? Is he elite? I don't care if he's elite, if he's polka dotted, if he's from Mars, whatever. This is my top tier of receivers. That's T.Y. Hilton. 82 grabs for 1,345 yards last year. Just 7 touchdowns. He kind of relies on the deep bomb for touchdowns. He's not much of a red zone guy. My worry with him is that Frank Gore is in there. Andre Johnson's in there. Philip Dorsett's in there. Are there going to be less targets now? Duron Carter, courtesy of Canada, via Chris Carter. I don't think he's going to factor too much, but there's Colby Fleener there, Dwayne Allen. There's a lot of targets to go around. T.Y. Hilton, he might disappoint you, but he's too good to pass up on. So those are the 11 receivers right there that I like in the first tier. What I really want to focus on when we get into my rankings in August is the second, third tier. You don't win. You do not win your league by picking Antonio Brown or Julio Jones or Eddie Lacy. I love it when I'm in a draft and someone will get to pick Adrian Peterson, and they'll say, oh, hell yeah, guys, I just got AP, you're all done. And I'll say, well, with all due respect, close your speaking hole, please. But these are the picks that anybody can make. You can let your cat walk across the keyboard, and they will pick one of these receivers in the first or second round. It's about that third, fourth, fifth round. Those late round picks. My favorite round in any fantasy draft is the last round. Just taking an absolute flyer on a guy that you think you're smarter about than everyone else. Then you quietly drop them in week 2 when they do nothing, but we won't talk about that. But between these 11 receivers, the 11 running backs I mentioned earlier, Bell, Lacy, Peterson, Charles Lynch, Foster, Anderson, Forte, McCoy, Murray, and Hill. That's 22 players. Maybe if you're really wanting to grab Gronkowski early, that gives you 23 players. Meaning that if you are in a 12-team fantasy league, which most are, most leagues are about 12 teams, some are 8 or 10, but look at a 12-team league, that means the first 2 rounds have 24 picks. So unless you have the first overall pick, which is a pick I don't like having, you should be able to get 2 of these guys. That's the strategy that I'm going to recommend. That's the strategy that I'm going to probably use, is go for one of these top flight wide receivers, one of these top flight running backs in rounds 1 and 2. Then you can swing back around 3 or 4, grab a high tight end, high quarterback if you want to go after Luck, Rodgers, something like that. That's something we'll talk about closer to when most of these drafts are going to happen, as I guide you down the road to 6th, maybe 7th place in your league. But it's all about coming in the top half, if you ask me. And it's all about having fun, damn it. Come on. So that's my top 11. Now, the part that I like, just like we did with running backs, I'm going to give you some wide receivers I love, wide receivers I hate, but not really. It's just a football thing, guys. Don't be offended. And some wide receivers to watch. And I'm basing these again on those ESPN top 300 rankings. Don't take them as the gospel. Don't even take them as words scribbled on a napkin. But for conversation, we're using it. Some wide receivers I love. I'm going to give you 5 of them. ESPN had DeAndre Hopkins ranked 15. Now, Hopkins had 1,210 yards last year. His hands are the size of my body. It's a fact. I've got a picture of me standing next to DeAndre Hopkins. He's holding me in his hands. Don't ask me for it. But he is an electric receiver. Downfield, he's getting better at those intermediate routes. Now, who's he going to have at quarterback? I hope it's Ryan Mallett. Push that ball down the field. But there's not a lot of receiving threats there. Arian Foster's going to help out of the backfield. Jalen Strong, beautiful pick. Cecil Shorts, will he be healthy? I don't know. But there's no reason that DeAndre Hopkins can't improve even more this year. He's a number 1 receiver. Young, talented. If you get him around the 15th, 16th wide receiver off the board, good on you. Right after him, ESPN has Brandon Cooks ranked 16th, the New Orleans receiver. Well, Jimmy Graham, gone. Kenny Stills, gone. There are a lot of footballs up for grabs in New Orleans. And I think Brandon Cooks is going to see a ton of them. He could be this guy that will easily go after 80, 90 receptions. The key for him will be touchdowns. Is he big enough to really compete in the red zone? But I think he'll make up for that with some yardage, some explosive plays. At number 24, this one was strange to me, Golden Tate at 24. This guy had 99 receptions last year, over 1,300 yards, which was 7th in the NFL. Now, of course, touchdowns, again, are difficult with Golden Tate. But this guy is scrappy. He is tough. He will make catches over the middle. Matthew Stafford obviously loves him. When Calvin Johnson is injured, which is probably going to happen, Golden Tate is the number 1, and he's fed targets. Forget about 24. If I can get him 17, 18, 19, 20, I like Golden Tate. Very good pick there. Number 27, I love Kevin White. Now, if Kevin White had have gone to Oakland instead of Amari Cooper, I'd hate him. More on that later. But Kevin White in Chicago, let's circle back to my talking about Alshon Jeffrey. Kevin White is going to get some of those Brandon Marshall targets. I don't think Matt Forte is going to catch 1,000 footballs this year again, so there's some targets there. I really think that especially in the second half of the year, when he establishes a connection with Cutler, that this guy is going to be on the edge of the wide receiver 1 conversation. I think he has tremendous potential within this season. Might not see it week 1 or 2, but I'm going to be reaching a bit for this guy. I don't think Martellus Bennett's going to put up the same numbers this year either. Kevin White's going to impact. And another White here, number 36, Roddy White. They've got Roddy White ranked 36, and I thought, come on. This is one of those picks that, you're tired of having Roddy White on your team, but this guy's a fine bet to put up 75 receptions, maybe 1,000 yards, maybe 6 or 8 touchdowns. This isn't going to be the pick that wins your league, but it's going to be a pick that really fills out your roster with some quality if he does fall. Because Roddy White, if you get him in the 30s, after the 30th receiver leaves the board, I think that's just fine. Matt Ryan's a great quarterback. Roddy White is the clear-cut, 100% clear-cut number 2 option in that passing offense. I think you've got to go for Roddy White there. Now, some wide receivers I hate. just as fantasy football players. I would love to sit down and enjoy a club sandwich and fries with these fine young men. But they're ones that I'll probably be staying away from if they stay around these rankings. At number 13, Emmanuel Sanders. Now, I hate doing this because he's kind of the hot name to hate on. It's the football hipsters are against Emmanuel Sanders, and I don't like following them, but hey. Now, Sanders never had 740 yards before his big season last year. Never had 740 plus. I think 740 was his peak with the Steelers. Then he walks into Denver, goes for 1,404. Well, of course, with Peyton Manning, you're going to do that. Will he repeat that? I don't think so. I think he's going to be more around the 1,000 to 1,100 mark. Again, with Peyton probably struggling to push it downfield as much. More of a running game. I like Emmanuel Sanders perfectly fine at, 16, 18, 20. But he's probably going to creep into the top 10 in some of your fantasy drafts. Someone's going to take him 10th or 11th receiver. I don't like that. The risk could very well pay off. When I'm saying I hate these receivers, I'm not saying they're going to flop. I'm saying that I don't want the risk on my roster. I'd rather you do. I'd rather someone else in my league. Right after Sanders, at number 14, I don't like Kelvin Benjamin there. He needs help. Cam Newton needs offensive line help. I think Cam Newton's going to get eaten alive unless this offensive line does something. He won't have time to get downfield enough. He tapered off a little bit in the second half. But with big receivers like Kelvin Benjamin, Devin Funchess, I think there's a ceiling to them. I don't think that they can go for, Calvin Johnson excluded, of course. But a guy like Kelvin Benjamin, I don't think he can go for that 1,600 yard season. I think the 1,200 yard season is his ceiling. Because he can make those contested catches, those jump balls in the red zone, but from Kelvin Benjamin, I don't see that downfield, game-breaking, breaking ankles of the cornerback to get open in an intermediate route game quite yet. It breaks my heart because I really like Kelvin Benjamin, but at 14, he's another guy that could creep up to the 11th, 12th receiver off the board. And I don't want that risk on my team. Sophomore slump, I don't want it. At 23, Amari Cooper. This actually isn't a bad ranking for him. I think that somebody in your league is going to overdraft Amari Cooper because he was the 4th overall pick in this past draft. So someone's going to say, hey, I've got the best receiver in this rookie class. I don't think they do. And I boil this all down to having Carr as his quarterback. People have so quickly anointed Carr as the savior in Oakland. I got into it on the quarterback show a couple weeks ago. I'm really not sure that's the case quite yet. I realize I'm going to get hate mail from Raiders fans. And I'm one of you Raiders fans. I like the Raiders. Be easy on me. I think the league is a better place when the Raiders win football games. And I do love Carr, but he's not as good as people are saying yet. I need to see him push the ball downfield. So much of his season last year was dump-offs, little throws. And a lot of that's because there was no running game. Not much in terms of receiving, but Amari Cooper, he just doesn't have that other threat to take away coverage. Kevin White has Alshon Jeffrey. Jordy Nelson has Randall Cobb. Roddy White has Julio Jones. On and on and on. Who else on the Raiders are people going to cover? I'm not sure. Amari Cooper is going to be drawing number 1 cornerbacks. I'd rather that risk be on someone else's team. Ranked number 30 by ESPN. This one doesn't just break my heart, it shatters my heart. I'm in here, I'm listening to Odell because I have to make this proclamation. But Jarvis Landry, he's not a pick that I want to make. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL. But I think he is a much better football player than he is a fantasy football player. Never lose track of the line that runs between those two things. He only had 9 yards per reception last year. He's a slot guy. He makes receptions, like a tight end would. Just, 6-8 yards, turn upfield, get an extra yard or two. Maybe dance, make one tackler miss, get that first down. But he's not a threat in the red zone at all. Not whatsoever. He could very well put up 90, 95 receptions, but not cross 1,000 yards or 5 touchdowns, which is, it's a strange stat line. If I'm building a real team, I'm all over that guy. Fantasy team, I don't think he has enough value. And number 39, someone's going to reach for this guy either because they're a Ravens fan or because they are a draft fan and they want to go after a rookie. Brashad Perriman, he ran fast in a straight line and shot up draft boards. I don't think he's going to do enough in year one, period. I think he's going to have some big plays. He's going to have some weeks where he gives you 20 points because he'll have 3 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown. But there's going to be a lot of weeks where he gives you nothing at all. So I'm going to stay away from Brashad Perriman. Let someone else have it. And lastly here, before I let you go, before we wrap up here, we're just running over 40 minutes right now. I want to give you some wide receivers to keep an eye on. These are guys that I don't love, I don't hate, but whenever you see their name pop up in the news, pay attention, because these could be guys that might have value for you. Number 17, Jordan Matthews of the Eagles. He is the hot value name. Oh, Jordan Matthews is going to break out with Sam Bradford, with Chip Kelly. Well, great. But he needs to show me that he can be that number 1 guy, not just kind of a number 2 plus, which is what he is right now in my eyes. If that system is really going to feed him, I want to watch through the preseason. I want to watch through training camp how Jordan Matthews looks. New quarterback, can he make that big jump? If he can, then that could be a great value pick in around the 17th receiver. Keep an eye on Matthews. Also keep an eye on the number 19 ranked wide receiver by ESPN, Sammy Watkins. I had Sammy Watkins on a couple of my fantasy teams last year, and I was thrilled with it. And it was kind of like the Amari Cooper situation. Watkins fell just short of 1,000 yards. He really overachieved for the quarterback situation there with Kyle Orton. But this year, is he going to have Matt Castle, Tyrod Taylor? Who is going to be throwing Sammy Watkins the football? If Sammy Watkins was on a team with, even with Joe Flacco, with Eli Manning, with someone like that, with Cam Newton, I'd have him ranked very highly. Sammy Watkins is an incredible freaking receiver. But with his quarterback situation, keep an eye on that one. He's either going to do very well or he's really going to disappoint you. Number 20, I have my boy, not just because we're almost name twins. It's Keenan Allen. Keenan with an N. Now in 2013, Keenan Allen as a rookie put up 14.7 yards per reception. Last year, it was just 10.2. He really didn't get it going down the field. There were a lot of screen passes that he'd turn into scrappy 5-yard gains, little slant routes. He and Phillip Rivers have a connection, but nothing was turning into anything. He was getting tackled quickly, and I don't think physically he was right all season long. I am a chronic Keenan Allen owner. It's a disease. I cannot shake it. I've accepted it. I'm terrible for getting hooked to a player. I feel like these guys are real. I feel like I can get the best out of them. Go into the locker room, give a nice speech. I haven't gotten the best out of Keenan Allen yet. But look at him in training camp. Is he bigger? Is he faster? Is he healthy? If he is all of those things, he's somebody you should really, really watch. Number 25 in ESPN's rankings, Andre Johnson. This is one of the most interesting fantasy football wide receivers on the board to me. Moves to Indianapolis, has a quarterback for the first time in his life. Andrew Luck's there. Now, he had a rough season last year, but 2 years ago and 3 years ago, 2012 and 2013, he topped 1,400 yards. Is he really that much older now than he was in 2013? Is he significantly worse? Well, I don't think so. He was never a guy that ran a 4.140. He was never a blazer. He's just that all-around strong, great receiver. I think he can really shine there. And then number 41, another guy that I've had on too many fantasy teams. More than I can count, more than I ever want to admit. It's Larry Fitzgerald. at 41. Now, if ESPN's rankings hold true, which they won't, but if 40 receivers leave the board and you're still looking at Larry Fitzgerald, just take the guy. It's Larry Fitzgerald. Carson Palmer will be back this year. I don't think their running game is going to be fantastic. They have a good defense, so they'll be involved in every game. He's not going to put up that 1,500-yard season, but he should be good for just over 1,000 yards, maybe 8 touchdowns. One of these guys that can fill in as your third receiver or a bye-week guy. Great depth to have. So look out for Larry Fitzgerald. And if you're in my league, please, be a friend, take him ahead of me. Because I cannot continue my relationship with Larry Fitzgerald. So that's all we've got for you on the show today. That was a great look at Cam Newton that we had. I want to hear your feedback on the situation. Do you think that they overpaid for him? Perhaps do you think they overpaid for him, but it makes sense, like I'm explaining it. It's a necessary overpay. It's the cost of doing business. Let me know your thoughts on Cam Newton. And let me know who you think will get the better deal between Russell Wilson and Andrew Luck. Russell Wilson's the winner. Andrew Luck is the stat hound. Who's going to get the bigger deal? Also, tweet into the show at the Backup Punter. Send an old-fashioned email, thebackupunter@gmail.com. It's not often you get a nice email. That's always a good surprise. Email into the show. Let me know what you think about these fantasy football wide receivers. Now, don't worry too much about my rankings quite yet, but tell me who you are looking for as a sleeper. Tell me a receiver that you absolutely hate, that you're not going to touch. Like me and... probably like me and Larry Fitzgerald. Despite the fact I'm watching him, I can't draft him again. So let me know what you think. Also, go over to Facebook, like the Backup Punter there. You'll get all of the articles from thebackupunter.com shot right into your Facebook news feed. Make it your one-stop shop. And as always, I appreciate you listening to the show. If you are someone who listens to the show on YouTube, the show's been really popular there the last couple of weeks, head over to iTunes instead, subscribe on iTunes to the podcast, and you'll get the show a little bit earlier. There's always probably a 2-3 hour gap between when it shows on iTunes and when I do get the video up on YouTube. So help yourself out a little bit there. Subscribe. You can also do it on Stitcher if you're an Android user. I keep saying Android user. From what I understand, you can download Stitcher on anything. I'm just not as tech savvy as I should be. But once again, thank you for listening to the Backup Punter Podcast. My name is Keegan Matheson. Next week, my name will likely continue to be Keegan Matheson. We'll look at tight ends next week, my favorite position in fantasy football because it's so damn hard to get a good one. That's a position where you can really win some games. We're going to look at the tight ends and any news that pops up between now and then. Will someone get arrested? Better yet, how many NFL players will get arrested between now and next week? We will talk about all of those probable arrests, what they were for, and how they impact the team of the arrested players. Send in your questions. I promise you I'll get to them on next week's show. Thank you again for listening. And this is Keegan Matheson, hoping that all of your punts in life stop on the 1-yard line. Let's talk next week.